Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving right into two of the most heavily debated and, honestly, most frequently misunderstood political and economic terms out there: communism and socialism. We literally hear these words all the time, right? But today we're going to rely entirely on the data to break down what they actually mean, where they diverge, and exactly how they connect to one another. Let's get into it.
So, let me ask you this right off the bat. Has there ever actually been a true communist country? Think back to your history classes. Picture those 20th century maps in your head. Who comes to mind?
Well, the answer is no. I know, it sounds a bit crazy, but it's true. While nations like China or North Korea use that label all the time, if we're looking at strict historical and economic definitions, a genuine communist country has never actually existed in the modern world. They operate under a completely different system.
All right, Section 1. The Great Communist Myth. Before we can figure out how these ideologies are different, we've got to look at where they share roots. Basically, both of these grew out of one massive, fundamental desire to limit the exploitation of the everyday worker. They both want to lower, or just totally wipe out, the influence of economic classes in society. And over the years, that core idea has spread like wildfire, sparking dozens of variations depending on how a country tried to pull it off. Stalinism, Leninism, Maoism, but at the end of the day, these are all just different flavors of Marxism mixed with various styles of revolution. Moving on to Section 2, Marx and Class Struggle.
Okay, so you really can't talk about these systems without talking about Karl Marx. He was a 19th century economist who famously co-wrote the Communist Manifesto. Marx was watching Europe go through this incredibly chaotic transition from monarchs to early capitalist economies, and he noticed this really stark divide. On one side, you had the bourgeoisie, the owners. These are the folks who own the actual means of production, the factories, the farms, the heavy machinery. And Marx pointed out that if you were a factory worker, the person who owned that building was always getting way more out of your labor than they were actually paying you for, which created this inherent built-in inequality.
And then, on the flip side, you've got the proletariat, the workers. Marx argued that this group was just structurally exploited by the bourgeoisie. So his proposed solution? A complete, total flip of the power dynamic. He envisioned a brand new model where the proletariat, the actual workers, would collectively take control of the means of production to balance the scales and fix that societal inequality.
Which brings us to Section 3, Socialism, the precursor.
So how on earth do you actually flip a whole society's power structure? Well, Marx saw it as a step-by-step evolutionary path. Step 1 is capitalism, step 2 is socialism, and step 3 is communism. This is absolutely crucial. Socialism was designed just to be a precursor. It's supposed to be the necessary bridge a society has to cross to get away from capitalism before it can finally reach communism. They are definitely not the same thing.
Here is the fundamental difference. Under capitalism, private companies own the means of production, and they aggressively compete with one another. But under socialism, that totally shifts. A democratic state steps in and takes control of production. So instead of competing, workers are contributing to the greater good, and theoretically, they all share equally in the rewards.
And we don't even have to look in a history book to see how this plays out. Elements of socialism are functioning inside heavily capitalist societies right now. Think about universal healthcare, your local fire department, or tax-funded public schools. Everyone pays into these based on their income or ability, and the community benefits as a whole regardless of who uses the services more.
Section 4. Communism, the final form.
Okay, so once a socialist state has taken enough economic control, the path is supposedly clear for that final massive shift: communism. And this takes that idea of collective ownership to the absolute extreme. We aren't just talking about sharing factories anymore, we're talking about the entire economy strictly requiring the total abolishment of all private property, period.
The actual theoretical endgame of true communism is pretty mind-blowing. Once private property is gone, the goal is a society that is completely classless, moneyless, and, get this, entirely stateless. It's a fully collective society where everyone works together just to be healthy, happy, and free. It essentially boils down to this one golden rule. Everybody does what they can to contribute, and in return, they take only exactly what they need. It is this incredibly vast, highly theoretical vision of human cooperation.
All right, Section 5, the human hurdle. But here is the massive reality check. As we established earlier, that utopian vision, it's never actually happened. Every single so-called communist country actually got stuck at the socialist phase. Why?
Because handing over immense state control almost always breeds rampant corruption. Look at places like the USSR, Venezuela, Vietnam, or North Korea. The core issue every time is that the individuals who get that power abuse it, and they bluntly refuse to surrender it back to the people like Marx originally theorized.
But the source material also points out something really fascinating and neutral about where these ideas actually do work. While total, unchecked state control consistently leads to corruption, socialist ideals have actually been incredibly successful when they're paired with capitalism rather than trying to completely destroy it. You look at countries like Sweden or Canada, they are prime examples of democratic societies that have successfully merged highly competitive capitalist markets with really strong tax-funded socialist programs for the greater good.
So it really all boils down to this exact quote from the source. The human hurdle of overcoming power and greed in government is the biggest reason we've never seen a true communist country. Marxist theory totally relies on this seamless, peaceful transition of power over to the collective, but it vastly underestimates the human flaw of greed once someone actually gets their hands on absolute power.
Which leaves us with a pretty massive question to chew on. Is a completely true, classless, stateless society even possible? Or is there something just fundamentally hardwired into human nature that's always going to stand in the way of that theoretical perfection? Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.